Good morning. Welcome back to Taylor Time Live. I'm your host, Seth Gladden, and today we are continuing our three-part series on the sticky truth, the science of selling adhesives. If you did miss last time, I encourage you to go back and check it out. It's on our YouTube channel, right there under the Taylor Time Live playlist. We covered things like the history of adhesives, types of adhesives, different market applications, and then we looked at a few terms like elastomeric, cross-linking, what are isocyanates and VOCs. So if you have a chance, go check that out. Great information there. We are continuing today as we go through some more terminology that is commonly found in the flooring world. So again, Shelley was here in studio last time. Couldn't make it happen this time, but that's okay. So Shelley, thank you so much for joining us remotely.
Thanks for having me, Seth. Yeah, the travel gods had other plans for me, I guess, this week.
Yeah. Well, glad you could join us remote either way. So thank you for being part of it again as we continue forward. You know, last time, as I just said, Shelley, we covered a lot of stuff, but I think really the purpose behind this series is to just help with terminology, help with kind of an understanding, right, of some of the basics. But would you mind just giving us a quick recap from your perspective of why we're doing this three-part series, how it's going to be helpful, and then we'll dive into some of the terminology for today.
Absolutely. I think as we dive into some of this terminology, our overall goal is to help everybody have a little bit more confidence when it comes to recommending the appropriate adhesive for different flooring types. I know we kind of toss around a lot of these words because they're second nature to us, and there's a lot of assumptions that are made to know, what a certain term might mean. And I think as I've listened to voice of customer feedback as well, there's an opportunity for us to kind of share some of our knowledge on the adhesive side to, again, kind of give some confidence to those that are recommending adhesives, specifying adhesives, and even in the installation community. So we're trying to, make it a little bit more conversational. And, just think about how much fun will be at the next cocktail party once we wrap our arms around some of this terminology.
Yeah, for sure. Everyone wants a good, a good adhesive terminology discussion around the cocktail hour. So, what we've tried to do as well through this series of terminology is take a look not just at what we at Taylor do, but kind of how the industry itself speaks. So we have a lot of competitors that make adhesives as well, but it seems to be most of these terms, most of these things that we'll be defining kind of go across the industry as a whole. So I think that that's helpful as well as people are looking at whether it's a technical data sheet or even a label on a product. What is it that they're looking at? What does that mean? Why does that matter? So thank you so much, Shelley. So today we're gonna be a little bit boring, but educational, right? So we'll have some fun with it too. But we are looking at a lot of terms. So let's start with I think there's two that are kind of misunderstood, sometimes used interchangeably, maybe even, and those are flash time and open time. So when you look at any pail of adhesive or any tech data sheet, you're going to see those listed on there, whether it's on an icon or just verbally telling you kind of what those are. But Shelley, talk to me about flash time and open time and how those are different, and really what to know about those as you go into using an adhesive.
Sure. And, Seth, you said it very well, too. We are an adhesive flooring manufacturer, and there's a lot of adhesive manufacturers out there. And a lot of this terminology can kind of cross-reference, and also it means different things to different adhesive manufacturers. So I think that's where like open time and flash time kind of become used interchangeably. But flash time basically is when an adhesive is spread. It's the time that you've got to let the adhesive kind of breathe. I like to use the analogy of, like drinking a fine wine. You open the bottle, you let it breathe a little bit, and then you can enjoy it. Flash time would probably be very similar on a dry set adhesive side, where you're waiting for that adhesive to kind of flash off. You're waiting for some of that excess moisture to evaporate from the adhesive before you can actually start installing.
So Shelley, you talking about this around the cocktail table, right?
I
And
did.
now you're talking about wine. So, you made it fun and you're bringing it back. So, yeah, no, that's very true. So with a dry set, that flash time, it allows it to get rid of some of that moisture, right? And then possibly even start to skin over a little bit and make that product ready to be installed. How do you see that as comparing to open time?
Yeah, so, and again, that's where they can be a little bit interchangeable, but open time is primarily used when you're referring to a wet set adhesive. It's the time that when the adhesive is being spread, you can start installing the flooring material. And if you think about a wet set adhesive, and I think we're going to kind of probably define that a little bit in the session later on, but when we're talking about an open time or a wet set adhesive, that means that you're going into that product almost immediately. So that could be a very short window of what we call open time. So it could be 0 to 15 minutes, but that's when you really start installing your flooring material.
Yeah. So really maybe a good way to think about this is if it's a moisture cured adhesive, would you say that then would be defined as open time versus one that's evaporation or air dry, you might say would be considered flash time?
Flash time, exactly. So, and if we want to go back to and kind of make this fun and interesting, if we want to go back to cocktails, we talked about flash time being, letting your wine breathe. Open time, you're cracking open that beer and you're taking a swig. I mean, I think that's really a good way to define the two different products in cocktail terms.
Yeah, I like that. So as we move forward, when an installer or even a salesperson is talking to someone about how to use and when to use a different adhesive, because there's so many, when we get into times, there's so many, and we're going to cover several more definitions of time today. But as we move into like working time, I think it's important that we talk about kind of the linear timeline, so to speak, of from the moment you spread an adhesive until you're ready to put floor covering on, and then what do you do after? So we'll kind of cover all of those, but as we take a look at working time, tell us a little bit about that and what the definition of that one is, what people should look for with working time.
Yeah, and that's where working time is going to vary depending on the adhesive, whether it's a wet set adhesive or a dry set adhesive. But basically, it's the amount of time that you have that you can effectively install that flooring material. And it's when it's going to perform its best and create that bond. I think it's important to note that working time starts after the open time or the flash time. So if a product has a working time of 3 hours, for example, you still have to wait for that flash time to happen. So your window may be, instead of a 3-hour working time, it could be that 3-hour working time plus the initial 30 to 60 minutes of working time for flash to happen.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a great point, because I feel like some people may feel like you see a working time of 3 hours, like you said, or 6 hours or 12 hours, and that's the amount of time you have from the time you spread it until you've got to be done installing. But that's not the case. It's actually, like you said, it bumps up against that initial flash or open time.
Right.
So that's a great way to look at it.
Thanks. Well, I think the other cool thing too is, as you're looking at evaluating adhesives, working time again can vary, 3 hours up to 12 hours too. And, you think about the incredible productivity that you can get on a product that has a 12-hour working time, for example. Yeah. I'll use a school example. You can spread several classrooms one day and come back the next day and still find that adhesive is still within that working time window and allows for some incredible productivity. But again, to your point, it bumps up against that initial open time or flash time as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know we're talking definitions, but when you get into those longer working times, like those 12 hours, some you'll even see like a 24-hour with like a true pressure sensitive. Obviously, those are going to stay like, a repositionable. It's going to stay tacky forever, but we have to watch out for the environment it's in. So dust or things like that getting on that. So that's really why some of those PSAs have that working time of 12 to 24 hours instead of days or weeks or months, because you can't trust the job site to keep it clean that long.
Right.
So, as we move through, and we're taking a look at some of these, another term that kind of fits in there is dry time. So you'll see that referenced occasionally. What does dry time mean?
Wow. So dry time, you think about the technology that is included in an adhesive, and what actually happens is, so you've waited for your open time or your flash time and your working time. So now we're talking about dry time. So this is when the adhesive starts building up its strength. And again, you're going to want to pay attention to, and you mentioned it, what goes on the floor, after you've finished installing. But this is when the adhesive is really, that chemistry is really kind of happening, and it's physically drying to create that incredible bond that you're getting out of an adhesive.
Okay. And that closely relates, I feel like, to cure time, right? Or might be kind of along those same lines, but you'll see cure time referenced a lot. We reference cure time a lot. Talk to us about cure time and what the difference is there and why that's important.
Cure time is kind of self-explanatory, but you're allowing that adhesive to cure, and that's where a lot of times that cross-linking magic happens. And I believe we talked about cross-linking in version 1. We were talking about some terminology, but again, this is where the magic and the science of adhesives starts happening, is when that cross-linking happens and you get those incredible bonds.
Yeah, so I think another way maybe to look at cure time, right, is typically it doesn't necessarily mean that the adhesive has reached its full bond strength, but it does mean it's reached a point where you can usually maintain that or get heavy traffic on it or things like that. So you might be able to heat weld or wet mop, strip and finish if you're doing a VCT. So there's a lot of things that typically kind of you'll see that time line up with other things. And we'll get into those probably in a minute as well. But
yeah, it's almost when that floor can be somewhat serviceable. So that's a great point. You talk about heat welding, and that's what you can do on top of it during that cure time.
Sure. So one that we don't see a lot at Taylor, but we do see in the industry, so I want to touch on it, is pot life. Talk to us about that and what to look out for with pot life.
Well, kind of funny, but maybe not. So, pot life, we're not talking about CBD or marijuana, but pot life usually is referred to during a two-part epoxy system, which, they're still around and they still have a usefulness to them. But with a two-part epoxy, you're literally mixing part 1 and 2, or A and B, together in a pot. And those two products create a chemical reaction which builds a lot of heat. And it also, again, gives you that strong performance. But one of the things with pot life is you've got a very small window to actually spread that adhesive and get the flooring into it, or it's going to set up in that pail. So there's nowhere for that heat to go if you don't get it out of the pot onto the floor and that flooring into the product. So to your point, Seth, we don't have a two-part epoxy system. Well, we do, but it's not super popular because there's others, better options out there versus a product like two-part epoxy that, again, has probably more negatives than positives these days.
Yeah. Yeah, it is important to know though, because like you said, you can lose an entire pail of product if you don't follow the directions, appropriately, or even half a pail. I mean, that's again just money lost, and if people aren't on a job site and don't realize that, a lot of those too come with like very specific instructions on how to mix them. You've got to, pour A into B and then mix it with this certain paddle at 3,600 RPMs for 4.5 minutes, or it's like you almost need Martha Stewart there. So. So I think the last thing that I want to discuss in time, Shelley, is a little bit of a pivot, but super important, and that's leading up to an installation. So if we look at acclimation, right, we hear that a lot, and you'll see different acclimation times on different flooring products or different adhesive products. Not going to say, we're not going to get into if it always happens or not, but what's the importance of acclimation? What does that really mean, and why do we do it?
Well, I mean, you think about if you live in the, Northwest or Northeast, in acclimation of a product, you mentioned that you want to make sure that that product is at the same temperature that it's going to be installed and serviced for the length of the product installation. You'll want to do that with your adhesives as well. You can't just install a cold adhesive or a super hot adhesive either. So that's where not only the acclimation of the finished flooring is super important, also the adhesive as well, and also a little bit of the handling. I don't know if we're actually going to talk about freeze thaw stability, but acclimation and the handling of those products will again help make sure that adhesive is performing to the best of its ability, because a hot adhesive is not going to perform well, nor will a cold adhesive.
Yeah, and you say hot and cold. I mean, we're talking probably extremes here. We do, most adhesives have a range, but they really do. I mean, most of them are in a liquid form, right? Or probably all adhesives are in a liquid form. And so if you get them super hot, they might be runnier. Or if you get them really cold, they're going to be very stiff. So yeah, very important. In fact, quick note on this, my parents are just finishing up building. They're building a beautiful home. And their builder is one of the only stories I've heard of this. So I had to call our director of tech, Gary, and tell him about it, because he required the flooring material and the adhesive to be put into the home under HVAC controlled for a week. So we say 72 hours. The flooring product that they were installing actually said 48, but he was like, we do a week. That's how we guarantee we don't have any issues. So it's rare enough. I felt like I had to make a call, and indeed it is pretty rare. But acclimation is super important, and there's right and wrong ways to do that. I think we've discussed that on other ones too. But how do you stack your flooring product? Or for example, again, back to my parents' house, all the engineered hardwood came wrapped in plastic, so they had to cut every single one of those open and lay them out to let them acclimate. Because if you just leave them stacked on a pallet, the outside ones might be fine, but the inside ones may not be. So there's a lot that goes into acclimation. So, well, Shelley, let's transition over from kind of out of time and into set. And that's kind of a broad term, so we'll look at what some of these different things mean and what they mean in the adhesive world. So there's a lot of different types of adhesive applications, as well as chemistries. So we'll talk through kind of like a wet set, semi-wet set, dry set, soft set, firm set, and hard set. I know I just threw a lot at you, so we'll back up and we'll go through them one by one. But that's the whole point of these, right? Is there's so many different terms that can be used, and when do those come into play, and when do you find them? Why should somebody care? So let's start with wet set. What is a wet set adhesive?
So I think I mentioned that a little bit earlier as well, but a wet set adhesive, that's basically when the adhesive is spread and you are going right into the adhesive with your flooring type. Very popular and common with resilient rubber, hardwood, broadloom, and even ceramic tile flooring as well. It creates an incredibly tenacious permanent bond, because that chemistry and that reaction is happening while the flooring is being set in there. So it's a very literal definition. Wet set means you're going into that adhesive while it's still wet.
Perfect. I mean, it can't get much easier than that, right?
It really can't.
So then as we transition out of that, there's a term, and I'm not sure how many adhesive manufacturers use it. I know we do, and I think a couple of our competitors, but a semi-wet set, again, it sounds pretty basic. Is it that basic, or what are we looking for with a semi-wet?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is that basic. So a semi-wet, I mean, you think of a wet set, which we just talked about. So you're going into it while that adhesive is wet. So again, there's no open time there. A semi-wet, you're allowing a little bit of time or open time for that adhesive to potentially skin over a little bit. There still has to be a wet adhesive underneath there. So it's just that top layer that's maybe drying a little bit. It does create an aggressive bond, but not as aggressive as a wet set adhesive, and a little bit more aggressive than a dry set adhesive, which is probably leading maybe into the next question.
Yeah, it is. So go ahead. I mean, we're just on a roll. So dry set is the next one.
All right. How ironic that I would know that.
I know, right?
So, again, we started with wet, semi-wet, and then dry set. Again, really self-explanatory. I think sometimes we just kind of get caught up in thinking that it's more than it is. But a dry set installation is that the adhesive is allowed to flash off or become dry to the touch without any kind of transfer if you stick your fingers in it. This is also very commonly referred to as a PSA, or a pressure sensitive type adhesive and installation method. So again, you think about installing resilient flooring or carpet tile, something that's got some weight to it, might need to be repositioned. This is where a dry set adhesive is going to be your adhesive of choice.
Yeah, and you might see, like with a semi-wet and a dry set, you might see both of those options. I know we have products where you can install it as a semi-wet or as a dry set, and really it just depends on the type, like you said, the strength of the bond maybe that you want, or the type of installation, the type of product that you're doing. But one advantage I think to a dry set is you're not getting that slippage, right? When you put your planks in it, they're kind of locked in place there, whereas a semi-wet, you might still get a little bit of movement. So it's super important to know the difference between those install types, because it's going to affect the way that people install on it. Maybe you're not walking on top of a semi-wet installation, whereas maybe you can on top of a dry. So
well, and Seth, I think you said it really well too, because there are some adhesives out there that can do both in the same pail. So it just depends on how long you allow it to flash off before you get into the product. So that's also kind of cool if you look at maybe a job site where you're installing a carpet tile and a resilient product, and you want the carpet tile to be installed using a PSA method or a dry set, but the resilient, you want a semi-wet installation. So it's kind of two products in one.
Yeah. Yep. That leads us to kind of almost the reverse of that, but not really. So when we look at set, there's other terms that come into that. And so we were talking about the three that we just defined are before you put the product on, right? Before you install the product. The next three we're going to look at are kind of the chemistry of the product for the life of the product, right? So soft set, firm set, and hard set. So let's spend just a minute going through those and what the differences are between those three.
Absolutely. So soft set, it's basically a dry set installation, but the product is going to remain obviously soft. I'm sure you probably were all playing along and could probably answer that question as well. That, it's again common and popular with modular products, and it still retains the ability to actually retain some tack maybe and be a true pressure sensitive adhesive. So you're not going to get that slippage, but underneath it, it's still going to be tacky.
Yeah, I think another important thing too, like you're talking about, is what type of flooring it can be used with, because a soft set, obviously, since it remains soft, you're going to get indentation, right? So if you try and put heavy rolling loads on a soft set adhesive, that's probably a bad call, because you're going to end up with indentation or telegraphing, things like that. As we move into a firm set, obviously that chemistry's dialing a little bit closer to that hard set world, but it's kind of a nice hybrid, right, where you get some of that bond tenacity maybe. But what do you see as the difference between kind of a firm and hard set, and when and where you might use those?
Kind of, I don't know why this popped into my head, but like Goldilocks, and she tests out the different mattresses. You've got soft, firm, and hard. And so the firm set is kind of right in the middle. It's that, you'll get a partial or that hybrid transition. So some benefits of a pressure sensitive adhesive and remaining a little bit tacky, but then also some more chemistry and some strength of that bond with a hard set adhesive. I would think of a firm set as something that's going to be used in potentially maybe a lower trafficked area than something in a higher traffic where you would require more of a hard set, which again, is that kind of leading us into the next question?
Well, no, maybe a little bit, yeah, because we'll talk about traffic, I think.
Okay.
But, I think a hard set, that's where typically, I think like my mind would go to like an epoxy, right? Like something, or if you, think of like an acrylic, like coating on something like a table, you think that's obviously very hard. Whereas hard set does not necessarily always mean like epoxy, right? It doesn't have to be that hard. I think the thing again that's important is indentation, and really if you're going to move that product, over time. So
Yeah, let's talk about a hard set being, the appropriate product for a hospital where you've got incredibly heavy rolling loads with hospital beds, or retail situations where you're moving fixtures and pallet jacks and gondolas and things loaded with product. That's where a hard set adhesive is really going to perform its best. That they always stink when you have to go to replace that flooring if someone uses a hard set adhesive, because they do have that incredible hold and bond to them. But guess what? You don't want that adhesive to displace like a semi-soft or a firm set adhesive may potentially displace underneath a heavy rolling load. So that's where hard sets prefer.
Yeah, so you can have, we talked about elastomeric in the last show. Again, if you missed it, go check it out. But you can have a adhesive that's a hard set that still is elastomeric. So kind of best of both worlds there. That does lead us into traffic. So another thing that's commonly referred to, but I don't know, hopefully everyone knows it, but I feel like there's some blurred lines sometimes, right, between what constitutes light traffic, what constitutes heavy traffic, and what are heavy rolling loads. Because there are different chemistries and different adhesives that really truly cannot handle heavy rolling loads especially. So talk to me about those three and kind of how that impacts not only the upfront when you're installing, but also the lifespan of that adhesive.
Absolutely. Again, very self-explanatory, but light traffic, you think of 10 o'clock on a Sunday night or something where there's not a lot of traffic on the roads, but also it's how much time or how much activity is happening on top of that floor after the initial installation, as well as for the serviceable life of that floor. So light traffic is going to be, maybe in a private office or a patient room in a hospital. But during that light traffic, that's when the chemistry of the adhesive is still working. So you need to still pay attention to the limitation of how much traffic is happening on the flooring right after the installation, as well as what's really designed to do during the serviceability of that floor.
Yeah, and unlike the picture, right, we're not talking about cars here. So, but it really is that concept of traffic, like you said. If it's middle of the night, you've got no cars on the road. But so really paying attention to what that adhesive is used for, where it's going to be used for, not just initially, but the lifespan of it. When can you roll, like you were talking about earlier, hospital beds or gondolas or anything across it. So, well, Shelley, we are approaching quickly where we need to end here for today. I know there were a couple of things I wanted to talk about, but we'll just push those to next time. But before we end, do you have kind of anything you want to recap here or just kind of make a point of?
Thanks for asking. I think, it's kind of our goal to be make adhesives fun, and also they're very commonsensical, if that's a word, commonsensical.
It is not, but it is now. We'll add that to our terminology and define that next time. So tune in.
Let's do that. That'll be funner. That's another word that doesn't exist that I love. Yeah. Funner. But it's having some common sense and helping break down the science of adhesives and make it relatable. And kind of just help everybody gain some confidence with some adhesives. So thanks for having me back, Seth.
Yep. Shelley, great having you back as always. We will see you again next month as we move into part 3 of this. I'm excited to hit some of the other terminology. It will be a little bit more in depth next time. We'll be covering a few things that maybe are a little bit less understood. So don't forget to tune in. But Shelley, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me, Seth. Take good care.
Yep. That is all the time we have for today. I want to thank you for joining us and watching. I do encourage you to go check out our website, follow us on social media, watch our Taylor Time Lives every third Tuesday at 11:30 a.m. And just remember, at Taylor Adhesives, we're with you every step.